Hi there. I think the grappling hook is ready to be published, and in this video I'm gonna do a quick tutorial and walk through the setup for this grappling hook. I'm gonna start with a 3D world and then I'll show the 2D world. So for the 3D world, this is the scene setup that I have. So I have those cubes that the player can attach to, and there's lots of other objects for just to set the scene. The minimum requirement for the grappling hook to work, you need to have the character asset or player. Then you need to have a rope asset, which I use a cylinder for 3D world. And then you need to have attach point asset. It's a cube, but I have it named as a rectangle, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So how the attach node works is when the player receives an input to attach to something, it finds all the cubes and goes through each one of them and finds the closest cube to the player. That's the logic behind the attachment. Once it finds the closest cube, it will spawn a rope and create a linker between the player and the rope, and also another linker between the attached point and the rope. So there's two linkers at both ends of the rope. So now let's take a look at the player. Inside here, the grappling hook logic is in this node. So this node has all the logic for the grappling hook. There are two inputs, so connect, and if you pass in true, it will trigger the logic to look for the closest attach point and attach to it. If you send a false signal to a connect, it will disconnect from the attached point. And that works really good with the touch input, since when you touch the screen, the pressed output will send true, and when you release it, the pressed output actually going to send false, so it's going to disconnect. Same thing with the keyboard button. When you press, it's going to send true, and when you release, it's going to send false. So that works really good. The second input is pull, and that's an option that you can use if you want the player to pull towards the attached point. And the logic behind pull is not the best. There's room for improvement, and I'll show where that logic is in the code in case someone wants to modify it. But basically, if the pull is enabled and you're connected, the player will move towards the attach point. In this demo, you can see that if you touch, it will only connect and it will not pull. If you hit the space bar on the keyboard, it's going to connect and pull. Now let's take a look at the options for the grappling hook. At the very top, we have the rope asset, and that's the asset that you want to use as a rope. Now, if you're going to be using a 3D model like I have right here, the important parameters for the 3D model is it needs to be a 2x2 units, and you can count the units by looking at how much grid units it's taken. So you can see 1, 2, so it's 2 units. And also it will be stretched in the x-axis. So you need to make sure that the direction you want it to be stretched in is pointing in the x-axis. So something like this. So that's the setup that will be used. Then the next option is the rope thickness. This value is going to be used to scale the thickness of the rope. So the diameter of the cylinder is going to be scaled down to 0.2, and you can change that here. The next one is the rope component name, and the rope component name is the name inside that rope asset. If we go to our 3D world and pull up the rope, here I have a little bit more nodes. I'll explain those a little bit later, but for the 3D rope to work, you just need a 3D model. You don't need the other nodes. The rope component name is this name right here, 3D model. That's the value that you need to set inside here so that the script will know which component it needs to modify. The next option is a pull strength, and it's a multiplier of how much strength the pull is going to have. So currently, if you go inside the code, the logic for the pull is located right here, and it uses the physics linear velocity to create that pull. So if you want to modify how the pull works, you can change these two lines right here. The last option is the attach point asset name, and it's not the attach point asset, it actually uses the name of the asset. And as you can see, I have a cube selected and it's named rectangular, but both of these assets, the cube and the rectangle, actually are going to be treated as attachment points. So if you have multiple attachment points, just make sure that the names are the same. I also use a velocity drag. You can use that if you want. all it does, it adds a rotational drag. So if the cube starts spinning, it will slow down eventually. That's the setup for the player. The rope for the 3D world is just simple. You can ignore the top 3 nodes. This is basically the setup for the 3D world. The attached point, or the rectangle, is also pretty simple, and it just has a 3D model. Now you need to have physics set up for the attached point, because the linkers work with the physics. So in my case, I have it set up to static. If you don't want the player to actually collide with those attached points, you can switch the affected asset to none, and that way the player is not going to collide with those points. I just have it affected asset turned on, so the player actually collides with those attached points. For the rope, I have the physics set to dynamic, and affected asset is set to none. So the rope doesn't collide with anything. The player is also a physics dynamic, and it has the affected asset set to all. That's the setup for the physics. Now let's take a look at the 2D world. So let's switch to the 2D world. And if you just switch to the 2D world with the setup that we had for 3D world, this is how it looks. Our rope is still a 3D object, and also our character is a 3D object. You would probably use an animation node instead of the 3D model. So let's connect that. And I had the state machine there just to turn off the animation node. So you don't really need it. You can remove that, and also we can remove the 3D model since we're not going to be using it. So for the 2D world, you would use an animation node. I'll get back to this set global depth in a little bit. For the player, you can also just switch to use the animation. For the grappling hook, we need to change the rope component name to animation, since we switched it to use animation node instead of a 3D model for our rope. Now we can preview that. And right away, you can see that there is an issue with a 2D world, and it's the fact that the rope is actually on top of the player and the rectangle. If this is the effect that you're looking for, you're fine, and you can just keep it as is. But if you want the rope to be underneath the player and the rectangle, you need to change the depth. And that's that set global depth node that we created. It does exactly that. So the global depth starts from 1, and the larger the number gets, the further away it is rendered from the camera. If you want the rope to be behind the player and the attached point, you'd use global depth of 2. If we preview now, you can see that the rope is behind the player and the attached point. Now, if you want to add a background, you'll have to control the depth for the background also. We can place it under our player. In our background, we can copy and paste the set global depth and set it something bigger than the rope. If you want to set the global depth for the background, the rope is going to be behind the background. So you can see that the player is attached to something, but we can't see the rope. And if you set the global depth to 3, now you can see that the rope is showing up. Also, for the rope, to have the animation stretch correctly, you need to rotate it 90 in X direction and 90 in the Z direction. You can't see it in the preview because it's facing down, but basically that's the rotation that you need to set up for it to work. The attach point for the 2D world just uses a animation. That's pretty much the difference between the 2D world and the 3D world. If you want to have multiple attach points on an object, you can make the attach points invisible and place him as a child of that object. For instance, let's add a space station, and we can place it in a scene, something like that. Now we can duplicate the rectangle asset. Let's move it up here. And for this rectangular asset, we can just disconnect the 3D model, which is going to make it invisible. And we can place that point at the place where we want our character to attach. So something like this. So 3 attach points. And this way you won't be able to see those attach points because they're invisible, but you'll be able to attach to the object. You can make them a child of this object by just dropping it inside here. And now if you move the space station, those objects move with the space station. And if we continue the setup, set the space station to kinematic, and add some movement to it. We will also need to switch the invisible attachment points to be kinematic as well, so that the collision shape will follow the object. And once we do all those setup, we can go to the preview, go up into the sky and find the space station attached to it. We can get on it and fly away. So that is it for the grappling hook tutorial. I hope you guys find good use for this creation. And like always, if you like what we're doing, click on the like button. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't still. For the first couple hours after this video gets uploaded, only Patreon supporters will be able to download this template. And it is just a way for me saying thanks for the Patreon supporters. If you also want to support me, you can support me at Patreon. Thank you for all support. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.